Sirs, welcome. Okay, a couple of things. This isn't going to be a lab as such. You'll get to play a little bit, but not much. Mostly I'm going to demonstrate and talk, and hopefully the idea is you pick up some ideas so that you can take them back to your offices and you'll remember, hopefully, something, oh, that guy did something, and follow it through. If you take a couple of notes or whatever. I've got a cheat sheet here that I'm going to be using during the session, a Word document. You're welcome to take a copy of it. I don't know if anybody brought me USBs or anything. Mm-hmm. You did? Good, because there's a couple of files on the thing that you can take with you. You're welcome to them. And we'll get started. Yes. How not to stuff it up. That's the most important thing. I don't know how many of you have got to the process where you've got to documentation after having your model in place and everything's fallen apart. None of your tags are working properly, you can't document, you can't dimension between things because they're slightly off axis. All sorts of problems like that go on. So the idea is up front that you get it done properly and then you don't have any problems later. So here's what I hope to cover. It's quite a list. I'm here until 4 in this thing. It's not 2 separate sessions in case anybody thought it was. It's one session all the way through. So you can have a break in the middle. Yeah. We'll have 5 or 10 minutes, 15, whatever it takes. So this is what I want to cover. If we can't get through to the end, I'll come back to this list and you can ask some questions on any of those, and we'll stop, make it 20 minutes short, and you can say, well, we didn't cover this, I'd really like to hear about that, and we'll go through those. Yes, what to do first. So this is the big one. When you get to doing your project, most people jump straight in and start modelling. I'm suggesting that's not what you do straight away. The first thing you should do is stop and think about how you're going to do it. Because what you do in a few hours up front, or even a few days, if it takes that long to get your plan together as to what you want to do, it'll save you hours and hours later. Because if you rush in, you've got your model around the wrong way compared to where you want to put your sheets, all sorts of things. It can be remedied later. Better off if you can get them up front and done at the start. So the first thing I would say is don't rush into your modelling. Plan it out. If you've got a BIM plan, use it. If you haven't, get one. There's available on the net. There's people have written up BIM plans that you can steal or you're welcome to use. Your site plan, 99.9% of site plans that are from Australia are useless when you first get them. The survey drawings are poorly done. They're stuff on the wrong layers. They've got items that are out in space somewhere, and when you go to import them into Revit, you get problems, particularly if they're the stuff that's miles away. And it may be hidden. They might have turned the layer off when you're looking at the survey and you think everything's okay because you do zoom extents and it's all there right in front of you. But the other thing that they have is they have blocks in there that also are poorly made, and it may have a point that's way off in the distance. And quite often you have to explode the blocks and get them back down to a decent size before you can use their survey or delete the block altogether. It's not important. So that's something you'll need to get hold of, the site survey. You've got to know where its base is, whether it's a local datum point or whether it's coastal grid. Better to work to coastal grid if you can, or the Australian grid. It's better to have some sort of known point. Will there be a need to link files? Because you're going to have a site file. I always like to keep the two separate. You're building your modelling file and your site file. So you're going to have at least 2 files that you're going to link, unless it's a very small project, a house or something. But even then, I quite often have a survey of my site file on a different project. So you're probably going to need to link files. How many? How are you going to manage it? Is your computer up to scratch with handling a lot of stuff? You know, you've got to have a certain amount of RAM in your machine, or it's just not going to be able to handle it. Are there going to be other people working on the project? If there are, you're going to need to work set it. Work setting the project is necessary if you're going to have people on it, or other people on it. Sometimes it's good just to work set the project because you can turn things on and off easily, even if you're the only person working on it. But most people, I would say, are in offices where there's going to be a few people here working on the project. Everybody here, should I ask this question? Everybody here Revit, obviously. Yeah, good. And all got some experience with Revit. So I'm not going to blow anybody away by saying things that they don't know something about. But so that you'll need to know. I just opened a project the other day that had 30 work sets in it. I almost fell off my chair. Don't go to that extreme. You should be able to get away with maybe 10 sort of work sets, depending on how many files you link in. I like to have a work set for every Revit file I link in. CAD files I normally just put on one work set, just called CAD files, because you either want them on or you want them off, or you want to load them or you don't want to load them. What do most of the people here use work sets for? As a tool to turn on and off like a layer, or because the original idea of work sets is gone.
Yeah.
Work sets were originally for grabbing hold of a piece of work and working on it. That no longer is relevant because of the way Revit now works, but it is still a good process for breaking your model up for not loading stuff. So if you've got a big model, like just open my Revit, this one, that is I think around about 300 megabytes, so it's a reasonable size file. And the work sets in there are not huge. Oh, there we go. I'm not used to this because I don't normally have my browsers on one screen. So there we go, that's all I've got. But it's enough that I don't have to load furniture and fit out furniture, which is a lot of 3D items in there because they were doing graphics of it to show the clients. And that takes up a huge amount of space. So when I'm spinning this model around, I don't want that in my model. So it really would slow down the graphics. If I was going around in a circle on this, it would really take time to it.
What about team members in the office, Shane? How many people would you have working on a project like that?
Up to 6. And it depends on what you're doing. I would say you don't have more than 2 modelers in a project that size. You tend to bump into each other too much. But you can have another 4 people or even more doing annotation. So they can be working on the annotation sheets and happily, dimensioning, notating, doing whatever, and not interfering with the people doing the modelling. So, and I'll talk about annotation and working views, what I call working views, in a minute. But let's just get back to the slideshow for a second. Jump backwards. So work sets, don't overdo them, just keep them to what you need, and mainly the use of them nowadays is to not load stuff into your project so that you can move easier around your project. As I said before, project set out, how are you going to fit it on the sheets? Or sheets, depending on how big your project is. You need to think about that because it's the orientation of your building, Project North, as it is in Revit, and how you originally set it up. And then, will the building require splitting into 2 or more models itself? It may be a huge tower, like 140 William Street. There's lots of various bits and pieces going everywhere. That could easily be split up into a couple of different parts. Some people like to split the facades and the shell from the core, from the main structure of the building, depending on how you're doing things. The hospital that's just being done by Hassel in Midland has been split up with a shell and core and a facade. So, because it was just too big. I think that's getting close to a gigabyte if it was one file. So it's getting up.
Just going back to your point about the project setup, does that mean you're actually defining all of your sheets at that point?
No, it doesn't mean you're defining your sheets as such. It's just, if you look at the floor plan of your building, let's say you've got a design. Let's start with that. You've got a design already of what you're looking at, and you're looking at your floor plate, and you need it to fit on an A1 or an A0 or an A3. How is it going? Will it fit at 1:100, 1:50? If you're going to be doing 1:50s, will the building fit on that sheet? Or I'm going to need to split the building, and by splitting it, I mean using a match line, yeah? And then having dependent views. So everybody know about match line and dependent views? Yep? No one said no? Does nobody know about match line and dependent views? No? Good. So, you have to look at how it's going to fit on those 2 sheets or 4 sheets or whatever it's going to be. So that's what I'm saying about fitting on a sheet. So real north might be here, but you might have your project north over here just because that fits on your sheets. You don't want to have 7 sheets when you can have 4. So the less the better. Just as an example of number of sheets, I'll just run quickly down here. Starting at that point there, these are all the sheets in this project. And this is only a $30 million project. So there.
Shane, would it be fair to say consultants would be interested in that as well? Because you'd be wanting to go on the same size format page.
Yeah.
You want to be orientating your drawings the same way.
Yep.
So that's why it's important at the beginning.
Yeah, very much. So again, like I said, if you start with a plan and you do this up front, you don't have to go spinning your model around or relocating your project north or whatever the case may be later. Eventually, something will go wrong and you'll have to do that anyway. You know, maybe you might get away with it 80% of the time, 20% of the time, you'll still have to do some tweaking where you've got to reorient your project north. But most of the time, if you've thought about it well up front, and you do have a building design up front, then you won't have to.
So did you create that massive list of, or basically massive list of sheets at the start?
No.
Just
no.
as you went
along?
No.
That grows. So
yeah.
What you've got, I've given everybody a template. If you're at a computer and you log on to the BIM day out, has everybody logged on to BIM day out? The things up there. We'll go. It's where I was going to go next anyway with the. I think. I'm just going to call up my cheat sheet. Yes, that's what I was going to.
Shane, if people go to Windows Explorer and then go to the H drive, they'll find your files there.
Really? Okay.
So if you go to Windows Explorer, then go to BIM Day Out, the H drive. There's a folder there called Shane Furlonger. Yep. And you'll find all these files in there.
So if you open the template file, now that's my template file. I've built that up over several years. You're welcome to it. And the reason I say you're welcome to it is because a lot of people get very precious about what they produce and what they have. In the current situation where we haven't got a lot of Revit users that are really power users at the moment, I think every bit of help you can give people, you should. And this is a work in progress. So next week will probably be different to what it is this week. And hopefully you'll find something that you want to add to it, something that's really good, and maybe you'll share it with me. Yeah, so what goes around comes around. So hopefully everybody takes that attitude. I know, I think I've got it written in here somewhere. I know intellectual property is important, but let's not get too precious with our intellectual property. Okay, if you want to open your template file, has everybody been able to open the template file?
The 6 project one, or which one are you opening?
6 project template.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've got to be in 2014 as well.
Yes, sorry. I should have told everybody that. Where are we? I'll just use this one. It's the same as the template file. Just got a bit more information in. Everybody got that? You can look at it up here if you have. So, what I've got is I've got a phase called Legend. If you look up in the top-hand corner here. This view is set up by phases and not on sheets. So I've got a series of things here that in my template file, if I'm giving this to somebody else to work with who's never used my template before, this gives them an idea of what's available. Once you're familiar with it, you can delete all this stuff and it gets rid of half those views, because all of this stuff here comes from these here. So they're just demonstrations of what's available. So that's what the different things look like. And if you zoom in, you can see. You want that? Yeah. And you can see it on your screens. They're just different types of section heads. And when you're doing your modelling and your annotation and what have you, they allow the guy who's going to be your, whoever is the project CAD leader or Revit leader or whatever you want to call them, they allow them to go through the model and get rid of stuff that's not required. So if you're modelling and you're doing a heap of sections through something because you want to see how it looks at a certain point in time or do whatever, you can use these temporary section markers here, and they stand out really well because they're nice and square compared to all the ones you would normally use for documentation. And at some point in time, you're going to want to get rid of them because they were just there as a temporary thing. But quite often people leave them because they get lost in the drawing, or in the modelling. But if you know that anything that's temporary is temporary and can be deleted, then you can go through later and clean it up. Also, reference planes. If it doesn't have a name on it, it's deletable in my book. So a reference plane is there for one of two reasons: to help you out to start with when you're lining stuff up or doing whatever, or it's there to model off. So you put in a reference plane because you want to create a model of something, a sweep that's at an odd angle to the building or whatever the case may be. You put in a name, you name it. Any reference plane that doesn't have a name, it's deletable. So that's my view when I'm going through and checking models, or I'm the head of the project team. So everybody that works below me knows that's the case. So if they want to keep a reference plane, they better name it, or I'll delete it when I'm going through and tidying things up. And the same with these things here. And you've got the same thing in elevation markers. A few dimension styles, your standard ones here, and then these. I don't know if any of you have used these. These are running dimensions. And for some reason in Perth, there seems to be an adverse reaction from most architects to using them. I don't know why. But I'll show you some drawings later of some concrete set-out plans. And you tell me if you'd rather do it this way, or using these guys, or whether you'd rather use the standard dimensions. And then what else we got? Just some text with leaders. Just different types that are already set up in there, so you don't have to go creating them later. And then you some standard tags for spot elevations and what have you.
Why do you get so many dimensions to the show?
Well, sometimes you want to do, well, there's obviously different sizes for different things. So it's not so much that there's different styles, it's more different sizes depending on what you want to highlight. Sometimes you just want to, one with the arrows in particular, sometimes you just want to show something that goes from here to here rather than its dimension of this. And then the different sizes for various drawings that you may want to use. You may want the dimension to stand out more than another. So they're just created, they sit there, they don't take up much space, so you can use them or not as you want. Slope arrows, coordinates, all this sort of stuff. So it's all in there as part of my template file. Sorry?
Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Does any of it relate back to standards in terms of drafting standards?
No,
So it's
not in
purely-
this.
Yeah.
This is how you want it to look. You can change this any way you want. So if you don't like using Arial, you'd rather use New Times, then change these to Roman New Times or whatever you want, or Calibri or whatever you like. So it just depends on how you want things to look. So this is the way, like I said, I've developed this over a couple of years as to what I want my drawing to look like when it comes out. It's in there, it's done. Anybody using the file or starting up a new project, it's already there. Also, you'll see a set of sheets. As the gentleman was talking about sheets earlier, this is what I've got in my template file as a set of sheets. So it's in a basic, project, you'll need this, which is your GAs, some elevations, fire strategy. There might be some in-ground works, concrete floor set out, dry lining set out. You'll notice there's not sheets for everything. There's sheets for just one, or a sheet for just one thing.
You get your visibility stats and everything sent with all those already? Yeah. Do you want? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm more of a structural background, so it's a bit different for me, but the template you set up would be quite similar. So I'm trying to set it up for my company at the moment.
Mhm.
Setting up something like this would be a good basis to start with.
Yep.
So at the moment I'm just doing everything as I go along, but having a template with everything set for everyone the same,
Yep.
that will save a problem in the future.
It sure would.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
And then once you've got your sort of template set up too, you can always transfer project standards to other projects so that it's the free
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
upgrading the
Yeah.
project and what
So yes, just use the transfer
projects.
standards from your manage menu. So in here also there's a few families that you might want to have as a base to start with. Don't put everything in there because you're not in every project that you'll need everything. Keep your library and people can just download from your library. So yeah, I've already set up a few sheets in there, and I would suggest your structure sheets, whatever you need, you would set up your sheets in there as well. Templates. I think I've got them set up. So there's a few templates in here. And you just set those up as well beforehand, and then people can just apply them immediately to how you want things to look. So, that's the template file. Go back to my cheat sheet for 1 second. Where did we get to? Was there any questions on the template file? Everybody sees the value in the template file, I hope. It'll save you a lot of heartache.
Out of curiosity,
Mhm.
family-wise, would you only have just your walls and whatnot, you know, you wouldn't have like a door photos or?
No, I'd probably put doors in there, your basic doors, generic doors.
Yeah.
Obviously you've got more complicated doors for different things, but I'd definitely put in your generic doors to
So
start
you
with.
have a sample of families basically.
Yeah. And I would start off with just, I think it's in here, the wall types. If you go down families,
Wall types,
basic walls, I think I've got a series of walls in there. So there's just some basic ones. That's something else, when you're naming things, you'll see there's a 6 in front of everything. That's, I don't know how
Still
many.
confuses me.
Why? Why is there a 6? Well, Mike Ruler and I, we started off at Mirvac, which had companies across, or offices around the country. And they had stuff in their library that was rubbish. So we wanted to know what was ours and what was theirs. So we stuck a 6 in front of everything. So because our postcode starts with a 6. So that's how it ended up with a 6. So you don't necessarily need a 6 in front of everything, but what it does do is everything you get on the net, you know, it's either got Oz in front of it or something funny, M for metric or whatever. A number in front groups them. So your stuff is always grouped, and if you're importing things or opening other people's files and you want to bring in your families, then if you've got a number or something in front that's you or your company, then it's all grouped together and you can find it easily. But the other thing is, name it so that you understand what it is. Because I've opened files where it says, Hassel was one, HSL underscore blah 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 underscore blah 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 MB3. What's an MB3? I wouldn't have a clue. It's a brick. It says it's a brick. It's a block. You know, it's concrete. I mean, at least it means something. The only one that's a bit different, because things get a bit long. So these are all stud walls. P for plasterboard, S for stud, or steel stud, and P for plasterboard again. You might think, what the hell is a V? But V for villa board. I know it's a brand name, but it was easier than typing in CFC, which I've got in here as well somewhere, I think. No, maybe not on that one. I've had to use CFC. But villa board, just a V, stands out when you're reading it. So just make sure when you're naming things that you do name them, that people can read them, because you might understand what it means, but somebody else may have to work on this project, and you might not be there forever. And they come in and they go, bloody hell, what the hell is all this about? And it takes them 2 weeks to work out what your walls are, never mind what the building's doing. So name things well. Right, back to my cheat sheet. Whoops, okay. Modelling technique, okay. What did we get to? No, not that one. No, no. No, you're going too far, you need to go backwards. And that one, yeah. Okay. Cheat sheet, I'll stick with this. So, my number one rule, or number 2 rule in fact, is don't be sloppy when you're modelling. If you're sloppy, if you just throw things together, when it comes to doing your documentation, you're just going to have nothing but problems. And likelihood is you'll have to end up doing fill regions and 2D line work and all other sorts of workarounds. You have to put in text instead of labels and all that sort of thing, because what you've built as a model is pretty well useless. So take the time. You'll be glad you spent that little bit of time to make things come together properly and not spill over into other bits and pieces. So don't be sloppy when you're modelling. It's very important. Setting up the browser, that's also important, because you want to be able to find things easily when you start your model. You saw the one with just the sheets. If there was every single view that was on those sheets in your browser, you'd get lost. Do you understand what I mean? You'll notice the browser section through here isn't big. There's not a lot of views there. That's because all the views that are on the sheets are switched off in your normal browsing section. So they only appear on the sheets. Those views are annotation views. So whatever's in here, I call an annotation view. Oops, that's not what I did when we started, that's just a schedule. Whatever's in here, floor plan, whatever's in there is an annotation view. So all you do on that view is you annotate. You dimension, you tag, and you note. You don't model in it. Because there's things turned off that you don't know that are turned off when you're going around changing your model. So you have a set of working views, and you'll see down here in the regular views that these are named. My name, because I worked on this model quite a bit, and Josh, and there was a couple of others that have been deleted off because they went off the project, so we just got rid of their views. But they are the working views. So when you go in there, you can set those views up as you want, so that when you're doing whatever you're doing, if it's to create a new set of walls or whatever, you can manipulate the view so that you can see whatever you want to see. And it's quite good that when you start it, you actually turn everything on so that you know what you're looking at. Because you could go changing things, and because something's been switched off, someone switched off the columns or someone switched off something else. This is why I say your view, not somebody else's view, because you tend to know, if you're working in a model on a regular basis, you tend to know what you're doing. You go and put something in place and it goes right through a set of columns or right through a set of walls or whatever the case may be. So make sure you have your working views, make sure you can set up your own templates if you want to for your working views. So you've got a set of view templates if you want to work on structure or something like that. I also set up just views of, like here I set up one called beams. Just so I could look at the beams on level 1 because it was at a higher level than the normal level 1 stuff, and there was a lot of funny things going on with the beams in this, the concrete beams in this particular model. So I just set up one view just so I could look at the beams on a regular basis. And then in the 3D, you can see I've got quite a few. Let me just pull that out. Quite a few 3D views, so I can look at just certain aspects of the building. So it's already set up for me to look at just the brickwork. So there it is, all the brickwork. Nothing else is on. Or I just wanted to look at the columns, the structural walls. And there they are. So have those available to yourself and use them, because they're really useful for seeing what's happening when you're working in certain things. And you can see what's crashing into other things as well. It also means you can check certain things out, like that's the core, but if I, wait a second, I'll just pick something that's, okay, there we go. I've got this set up as a structural wall, because that's what it was, and if I had brickwork showing up in here, which in this model wasn't structural, I'd know I've got something set on the wrong setting, because this view only shows structure. So it allows you also to do a bit of a cross-check on your model and see what's happening in various places. If you've got everything on the right work set or the right work or the right place, or how you've got the model set up. Okay, back to my cheat sheet. So that's setting up your browser. I recommend it to have your working views separate from your sheet views, because if you've got your sheet views inside your working view section, you know, as most people do, they just have it all there, you do get lost. You've just got so many floor plan views and so many this and so many that. You can organise your browser quite well. Does everybody know how to access the browser? Yeah.
Why did you ever set up for phases?
Because I've got legend phase. I'm going to explain that in a minute. And you can have various phases in the project, but there's a legend phase, and I recommend that as a usage as well. I'll show you all about that in a second. Right. Working views and annotations on sheets, as we were just talking about. Dependent views, okay, we all know those. I better go into legends now, actually, because I keep referring back to it. If I go into manage, I need to keep putting on my glasses so I can see what I'm doing. Whoops, that's not the one. Phases. At the start of this project, I've got a legend phase and a demolish legend phase. And the reason for that is it's nice to have an area where you can work things out, set up a set of 3D images where you want to maybe drop it on a sheet because it's a difficult detail, but you need to have various views of it, and you don't want to be taking views of the model, you just want a piece of it. You want to have structural steel set up in a different way for some reason, whatever that may be, just to work things out. Also, it's a really good way of doing windows, to have windows in what they call a legend, what we call a legend view or legend phase. What you do is, what you do is you set up your two phases.
It's curtain walls versus windows.
Yes.
Yeah.
You set up your legend, your two phases, call them whatever you like. I call them legend and demolish legend. You've got to demolish because otherwise your items that you put in this phase will show up in your schedules, which you don't want. Schedules are phase specific. So all you want is your new construction or your existing construction to show up in your legends. Not your legends, sorry, your schedules. So you create this phase and demolish everything you put into it so that it stays within that phase and doesn't get dragged into the rest of your model. So when you're doing your takeoffs for your brickwork or whatever you want to do, then you'll know that that isn't there. You're not double accounting. So I'll just go quickly to the legend
Shane,
phase.
I have said, I've learnt that off him. I've used it really successfully for a wall legend. It can actually be dimensioned as well.
Yes, I was going to say that.
But
yes.
it has so many uses when you actually want to be able to do representations
Tags.
of things and tagging.
You'll notice, because I've got a note on here. Where is it? Did I put it on there? No, never mind. When you're doing legends, the legends that are available within Revit are pretty useless when you want to do a wall legend or a window legend or anything else because you can't tag them. They're 2D elements. They come in as a hatch or a picture, 2D picture, and you can't do anything with it. If you put it into this phase, and if it's a group, groups exist across phases. So I can have a curtain wall acting as a window, and I can change it either in the legend or in the model, and it'll change in my legend. So I can have my sheets set to my legend. So I've got, here's my window, and it's in legend phase, and I've got my my working phase here, my new construction, and I need to increase the size of this window by 100 mils. I do it here. Because it's in a group, it does it here as well. But that particular item doesn't show up in my schedule of curtain walls because it's in a different phase, so it doesn't exist in the regular model. Does everybody understand that? It's sort of like Back to the Future.
It's not the most easily
Explained thing, no.
And I tried to explain it over the phone, not the
No, that would be difficult.
In the end, I did a project and just emailed it and gone, interrogate it, play with it, and you'll figure
You'll
it
get
out.
it in the end. Yep. I'm going to go through it a bit more.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go to the 3D legend phase just to show you something. Okay, here. This is building. This was some balcony framing that needed to go on the building, and because it was changing and evolving on a regular basis, I wanted it outside the model in a way. So what I did was I copied everything into this legend phase and then worked on it here and got it the way I wanted it to work, and then I copied that back into, in fact I made a group out of it I think, and then used those groups, yeah I did, and then used those groups back in the model so that if I needed to adjust them they would adjust in both places. This I exported to a steel manufacturer, just as it was, as an AutoCAD drawing, and he imported it into his program, and they cut all the steel from it just as it was. So I didn't have to dimension it, I didn't have to do anything. He had it exactly as he wanted it, and they just took it. So it can be really useful. So that's just that, but let's have a look at the windows. I'm going to go to the Windows section. And I'm going to try to explain this a little bit better. If I can find the windows. If anybody sees me going past windows, let me know. It's been a while since I worked on this project, so. Windows, very good, thank you. No, I don't see Windows in here. Down. Ah, right, thank you. Can't see all of them. It's a big model, so it takes a bit of time. And this isn't a slow computer. Okay. If you look down here, you can see that this is the legend phase. So it's a regular view on a regular sheet. It's an elevation or a section, I can't remember which, elevation I think, of an element that is in the legend phase. Several elements that are in the legend phase. These elements are also in the model. So if I clicked on one of these and said select all instances, it should be two, yeah. So there's two of them. One in the legend phase and one in the model. I can make a change here and it'll automatically reflect in the model. But this item, which is in the legend phase, won't show up in any schedule that I create for the model because it only exists in this legend phase.
So basically it won't count. If you
It
don't
won't
count
count.
your windows, it's not going to add this one.
Yep.
Why do you want to do that for though?
Why do I want to do that? Because if this was a legend as created in a Revit legend, so I create a new view, I'm going to go to view and I say create a legend. Yeah. all I can put on there are 2D items, I can't tag them. Yeah? So if I wanted to put on, and sometimes these get quite complicated, if I wanted to put on my tag, which I've got here, which is a real live tag, and tag that window frame or that window group. And sometimes you've got several bits and pieces in there. There might be a door that's in there as well, and that I can tag that. All of that I couldn't do on a Revit legend. I'd have to put in dumb text. So if you change them, you've got to then go to your legend in Revit and change it. Whereas if I change it in this, it updates automatically. And it's the same with walls. So I have a legend here for walls, which is somewhere. Here we go, wall type legend. With a heap of dependent views. Now why are there so many dependent views? Because they're all on sheets. And that's the only problem with doing legend views on for walls and things like that, is you actually have to create more views for every sheet, because you can only drop one view on the sheet. But it's not a problem, you just create them as a dependent view, and then you only have to edit one thing. So when you edit your legend, you only edit it once, because the dependent view is of the same thing. It's not a dependent view of something else, it's of that exact thing. So if I go to one of these, that's it there, that's my wall legend. You can see there's quite a few walls in there. And if I had to change any of these, that one's obviously stopped existing. If I had to change any of these, then all I've got to do is change it here and it updates everywhere in the model. Whereas if I did this in a Revit legend view, I would have to change the model and then I would have to change this. Does that make sense to everybody? Because it's dumb.
The other thing I found is you can't actually dimension, say your walls and you
Oh, yeah.
dimension your plasterboard and all that. You can dimension windows in a normal legend tray, in a normal legend. You can't dimension your walls. So say you actually want to pick up that there's 2 loads of plasterboard on one side of a 92 stud frame. You can write it, it can be in the description of the wall, but it can't physically be dimensioned.
Yep.
With this, it really exists. So you can actually dimension the elements of the wall within your legend that you're popping on your sheet or whatever, which is going to...
Yep.
I wasn't so asked about, well, why don't they just make it out in the first place?
Good question. It's, you can blame the Americans for that. They're the ones who made this program in the first place. And they, for some reason, didn't think it was necessary. And still don't. So, we've come up with a workaround, and it works.
Works well.
And it works well. So, it's something you can take on and use. I suggest that it's a good thing to use. I suggest that everybody gets their head around phasing. Phasing is good. A lot of people think, God, bloody phases, I can't understand them. And it is difficult because they've named things with the same name. You've got your project phases, and then you go looking at phase filters, and it says new, existing, demolished and temporary. Okay, that makes sense. And then you go looking at this, and again you've got existing, demolished, new and temporary. Yeah, okay. That will make sense as well, so you think. And then you go down here, and you look at your phase, your actual phase of existing. When it says existing in the in that little menu, it means existing in the phase that you're currently in. It doesn't mean existing as per this little bit you've got here. So if I go back to this existing here has nothing to do with this existing here. Does that make sense? No? I didn't think it would. It took me a while as well. This existing is our own wording. We can change that. I could call it anything I like. I could call it Fred. Yep. Next one along, this one, this means it's existing in the phase that you've just started. So if I had 10 phases, everything up until the 10th phase that hasn't been deleted or demolished is existing. And it could have been created in any one of the 9 phases beforehand. Everybody with me? Just? What's new is what's created in the phase you're currently working in. So if you were working in the existing phase and you create something new, it would be new in that phase. And it would exist in any phase after that until it's demolished. Temporary is very simple, at least. That's created and demolished in the same phase. So that's easy to remember. And it doesn't matter what phase that is. You can call your phases, like I said, 1 to 10. Doesn't matter what phase it's in. It only exists in the phase and it's demolished in the phase that it was created. And it's shown in a specific way. Demolished has to exist before it can be demolished. So if you demolish it in the same phase, it becomes temporary. If you demolish something that was made in the previous phase, it becomes demolished in the phase that you demolished it. And then you've got existing, like I just said, is it was existing before the phase you got to it, you were currently working in. And that could be any phase prior to the phase you're currently working in. And then there's new, which is whatever you create in the current phase. Does that make sense to everybody? I hope. Sort of. So just remember this bit at the start, and Revit, when you first started up with whatever, with what comes on the system out of the box, will have existing and new construction as their initial phases. And you think existing, okay, that makes sense. And then you look at the phase filters and it says new, existing, whatever. You think, oh, it's got to relate to the one before, and that's when you start getting confused. So existing in this instance, and this particular thing means for me that it was whatever existed before the building started. So if there was something to be added to or demolished or whatever, you would stick it in the existing phase, and then in this instance, I could call that, I can rename that and call it 1 if I want to. I'll just call that 1. Now it doesn't confuse with the other ones. So in phase 1, I would stick whatever starts. So if you've got a hoverer, you after something? No? No, okay, he's just looking.
So the best way to explain it, like doing the extensions or
Yeah, if you want. What the building was would go into phase 1, or existing, and then what you put on new, you would put in new construction. And that way you can show, so in your graphic overrides, it's just going to take a second because I just changed that name there. And it's going through and changing everything in the entire project. I shouldn't have done that. Okay. So in your graphic overrides, you can then tell it how you want certain things to appear. So how do I want those existing items to appear when I'm looking at a view? And these you apply to your phase filters. So these filters here by category, that will appear as it appears normally on your visibility graphics. So where it says apply by category, it's how it would appear in your visibility graphics. Not displayed, pretty simple, just doesn't display it. Overridden is your other option, and you can change those however you like. Overridden, it will then take what's on the graphics override. So you can set these up however you like. You can have as few or as many as you want, and you choose how you want it to show up in your different views. And that is what appears down here in your phase filter, that one there. Yeah? So you choose how you want it to look. Have I lost anybody? Huh? Good. Did better than me when I first looked at it. Okay. Moving right along. Where did I get up to? So that's phases. So that's for the legends. So a very useful tool. If you're going to do, like I said, some 3D.
You'll continue on.
I am.
Right, yeah. Is everyone aware that this is a 2 hour?
Yeah, I
We're
told
going
them
to
to
have a little
start.
bit of a break though.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when they're ready, they can have 10 minutes or whatever they want. So the legend phase, really useful for setting up an area where you can have a play with stuff and not have it affect any of your schedules. Also great for doing a window schedule, door schedule, or a wall schedule, or anything else like that, or wall legend, because you can tag it, you can dimension it, you can do all sorts of things to it that you can't do in a regular Revit legend. Yeah? Dependent views for legends. Okay, so that was the dependent views. I showed you that's this here, this wall legend thing. Needed to create that many because that was how many sheets I needed to put them on. So it's just however many sheets you have that you need to put them on, that's how many dependent views you're going to have to create. You don't have to do the same thing obviously for the window legend because it only goes on one sheet. It's just for the one thing. So, but the wall legend's just a little, box that goes up in the top corner or the bottom corner or wherever in the sheet. So you need to have a look at it. Just while I'm in here, I was going to show you about dimensions. Concrete cellular. Take this one.
When you say window legend schedule,
Mm-hmm.
do you mean like the view that's on the window schedule? That's a legend, not in.
No, the schedule is a legend. So, well, in this case, if it's a window schedule, it's not a window legend. But normally, the Americans do it as a legend, and they would stick it on the legend sheet or on the legend view. So that's the way they create their window legends. They put them on a sheet. We have a window schedule where we do a different one. So if you want to be able to tag it, and you can dimension it in a legend, but if you want to be able to tag it and tag the elements within it, then the only way to do that is by using the legend phase. If you don't want, if you're not worried about taking anything off, any elements off your model, like knowing how many bricks are in your project, then you could just stick it off to one side of your model somewhere, out of the way. Mind you, every time you go to spin your model, if you haven't clicked on an item, it's going to take the centre point of everything and rotate around that. Yeah, so you're going to see this thing every time you want to rotate unless you crop down to, so that can be a bit of a pain, but right.
Sorry, Shane.
You're off to another one? Yeah,
Yeah.
no problem.
Thanks very much.
That's all right. I was saying before about the running dimensions. I just wanted to quickly show you. This is a concrete floor set-out plan. And this is a running dimension. So it goes from the grid line. Actually, I'll just activate it here. It goes from the grid line to the point that you want to dimension. and it's exactly where it needs to be. And it doesn't overlap other bits and pieces. So if I was doing this in a standard way, I would have lines going everywhere that are my annotation dimensions. Whereas if you use this guy, you only have the little arrow exactly where you want it.
The habit people, that's what you mean. No doubt there's people on site that just
Yeah,
understand.
well, I've worked with the guys who did this, and I've worked with the other guys, and they loved it. I explained to them immediately what it was. And you still may have, like, you can't get, I'm just trying to find one. Yeah. You still may have a regular one, because if it's too small, the arrowhead doesn't show up. So you may have regular dimensions in there as well. So you've got to use, sometimes you just got to use that type of dimension, but at least again, you can still put it exactly where it needs to be. I haven't found, I mean, everybody blames builders for being a bit thick sometimes, but I haven't found any of them who couldn't read this.
Builders where you come from.
So, I don't know, the guys who did this project did such a great job, but at least they had a good set of plans. So, I mean, it's up to you, well, it's not up to you, it's up to possibly your bosses or whoever runs your company. But I can recommend this as a way to go for dimensioning certain things. You may still, I've got to I'll just show you another trick while I'm on that one as well. So this was all to grid, but the brickwork is all to itself. So I've got start out points, masonry set out points, which are to the grid. So the brickie knows exactly where he has to start a wall, but he's more interested in how long is that stretch of wall, what openings do I have to put in it, and where do I finish? So he wanted regular dimensions. So this plan is a combination of both. My columns are to the grid, so anything that's in a running dimension is to a grid, and anything in this case that was like this is a brick dimension. And you can easily set up a dimension legend to say exactly how you do measure things.
Is that something you set up with the builder before you started the work, or is that?
We had actually started, or we had done some of this previously, and it was the masonry was just as it was, like the concrete set out drawing, just running dimensions. And because we had a little bit of time in this regard, and the brickwork in this job was really complicated and really required a lot of detail. I'll show you, I'll just zoom out of this in a second and I'll show you what I had to do for it. I spoke to the builder, and the brickie, they'd already hired the brickie to do the job, his team, and I said, how would you like your dimensions? Would you like it just everything to the grid, or would you like me to do your openings and your walls and, you know, give you point to point? And he said, I prefer the point to point. Give me set out points around the building and I'll work point to point. That's easier for us in the team. So that's how we ended up like
It's like
that.
a design construct or something. So the builder's already nominated for the.
The builder tendered.
So you were still working on the drawing?
We were still working, because
Okay.
when I got this project, it was going to tender in 2 weeks. That's when I started. And after 2 weeks, I pulled the whole model apart because there was 6,000 awnings in it.
So,
That's all, yes. And none of the building was brick dimension. even though the building was brick. So, and it wasn't dimensioned horizontally or vertically. So it didn't work vertically, brick dimension wise either. So the guy would have had to cut bricks to make it fit, and as the bricks are mostly exposed, it was going to be a nightmare. So we had to go back and remodel it. So it was a lot of just keeping ahead of the builder as we were producing these drawings.
So is that something you do in the future now, those dimensions?
This is something I do because I know what the brickie wants. You know, any brick is going to want those sorts of dimensions. He's going to want to know, like I said, where his openings are, how long his wall has to be, and a starting point. So his starting point's to the grid. And I make that quite clear with, you know, my set out points around the place, saying, here's a masonry set out point.
So who do you have to convince? I mean, when you said before about you gave that model to the fabricator to do those balcony, whatever it was.
Who do I have to convince?
Because normally they'd want to, when the client asks for something, you've got to give them what they ask for, right? And usually they want just something on a bit of paper. They don't care about the model too much because that's the way it's always been.
Yeah.
How do you get through their mind that maybe they don't need that anymore, and all they want is just a file with data in to give to a fabricator?
Yeah, well, once it got to that stage, it was pretty much up to us because we were dealing a lot with the builder at the time.
Okay.
So it was not up to me pretty much because I was the liaison with the builder, and I was trying to help them out as much as I could because we were behind the 8 ball as far as the construction process was going. Because the tender was, the building was documented, the building was priced on the tender documents, and the tender documents weren't good. So, and we all knew that before we started. So the plan was that by Christmas, because this happened in August, and in Christmas, 4 months' time, we would have a decent set of plans going to them that they could then go forward with. So over that 4-month period, we worked as hard as we could to get this sort of stuff. So there was a long liaison once the builder was brought on board with what was going on. So that's why a lot of this stuff is the way it is. And then there was a steel guy that they brought on as their main steel guy, and I had some work to do with him as well because he was after different dimensions for different things and all that sort of stuff. And I said, well, how about, I can give you this. Can you use it? And he said, yeah, sure can. Just give it to me in a 3D AutoCAD drawing and I'll import it straight into my program. And he took it from there.
Shane, who does your as constructed drawings? The architectural firm or the builder?
It depends. This particular project, there are no as constructed drawings.
Nothing requested by the client to be as
Nope.
constructed?
Nothing at all.
And if it was requested to be as constructed, would you pass the model on to the builder to do that, or would you retain?
I would, personally. You would probably, if you were setting it up from the start, there would be a fee that would recognise the fact that you were going to give them the model, because this was never required to be a Revit project. It was just documented, design it and document it. But this was a formworks project, and they decided that they wanted to be in Revit, and that's how they started.
One of the benefits of the contractor having the model is that if they need to find a dimension,
They can.
they can quite easily.
Yeah. I gave the DWFs, 3D DWFs of the model to the concrete guy so that he could interrogate it when he needed to.
There's also a risk that the contractor accidentally changing the model and giving himself the wrong dimension.
No. If you give it in the model
Yeah.
to work off, yes, but if you give him a DWF,
Yeah, if you give
you
him
can't
the model.
change that.
So I
And that's what I gave them to work
I
on.
wouldn't give them the model.
No.
Well, do they get the model sometimes if they're commissioned to do the as constructed?
Yeah, after it's been built, they can like, but not lost the building because they don't design it. If you reach that, some guy gets the Revit file,
I understand what you're
opens
saying.
up, pushes the wall over, and then builds it like that, and then
Yeah.
going. So
But
be careful.
some of the problems they have is not so much with the architectural, but with the structural, where they have to do shop drawings, and they need accuracy for steel.
Sure.
And the only way they can get that really is from the model.
Yeah. So this, like I said, this building was very complicated with the brickwork. So all around the model, or the plans, I put sections in showing the guy how the brickwork was supposed to be, because the brickwork changed type 3 times or 4 times in one level. It wasn't just one type of brick, it was 3 or 4 types of brick going up the building. And within one level it would change. So you would have to, so this sort of stuff you can do, I find, you know, and there's not a lot of information on this, it's just a few tags showing what it is and how many courses they have to change it at. So they found this invaluable, and it takes me 30 seconds. So why not do it? So, who wants a break? Yeah?
How was things so far?
This is why I say, all right.
Did I QA? It was more like
Not sloppy.
we don't
You don't have any more time.
It's good. Because we don't use it all the time.
Just to know what it does. That's it.
And the other one is a tackler, which is alright. I mean, could have been a little bit more content. 15 minutes.
Yeah,
That's it. So yeah.
all right. But not.
Oh, this is a fascinating
Yes. If you're,
No. I wish I did. No, there's nothing in there. I've got it on my phone.
I've got working views of the legend phase in this model, yeah, so that I can go in there and work in the legend phase.
That's just for the legend.
That's just for the legend. But
Does it mean that
yes, you can do it
I got a couple.
another way, which is to just do elevations of your elements,
Man.
and then
When we're
hide
inside.
the elements. Yeah. So you can hide, let's say I want to do that with the, so take an elevation or a section showing that window, and then you turn off the wall. Yes, so just turn the walls off. And now I've got the window. Now I can tag it and I can do whatever I want to. So that works fine. But when you've got 300, 400 windows, and maybe of those 300 windows you've got 50 or 60 different types, and you've got to create an elevation for all of those.
Are you guys
Because the
coming tomorrow?
buildings all like this. It's a pain in the butt. Because also you want to be able to move your window. If you're going to do it window by window, your elevations of each one in the model, yeah, you may have them in the wall and they may be spaced differently. So if you just put them in one elevation, you're going to have funny looking spaces between as you put it on the sheet. Yeah? So the only way to change that is to do an elevation for that window, an elevation for that window. And you put them on each of those elevations on the sheet, and then you can move the views down so that you get to the views lined up how you want them to
Like
look.
those really nice and all that.
Yeah?
Oh yeah, I do.
So if you do it in the legend view, like I said, create a group
And then people will take
of your
shot,
window,
and then it was yours.
which makes sense as well,
Not
because
your
you can then
issue,
have, if that window there appears 20 times on the building, you only have to do it once, and then you copy that group around the building. So you just make an instance of that
Then
group around the
all
building.
the things that got
You only have to change it once.
they don't have a division code, so that's what was freaking out.
Yeah?
Is that for,
So let's say that's my window, but I need to put another in the
I
middle.
was going to say, for
Now, if I hadn't had a group
Yeah,
that
that's
go
right.
through to every window and put them I've got a group that just say, okay, volume in the middle of that. Because I've got a legend phase as well as a group, it does that as well, and it
And then
shows
she
up
was
on my sheet.
really, really like, you know when
The beauty of that is,
I went to her.
because they're in groups, you can put them in here.
Okay, bye bye.
So you can have, even though they might be on floors above, 10 floors up,
You can't let it get to you.
Yeah, you get to a point. I really am.
line them up so they fit
I'm not
across the
gonna
sheets.
cry. I'm not gonna help
One
anyone.
elevation.
Exactly right.
You know what I mean? I know that I have to go back and stay over there like and still pretend. Good.
That's good, you know.
I've already been here.
Windows,
Different. It's the same, really.
Well, but at least
Another project.
we've
not required.
they've given us
So
3 weeks.
if you've got a family building, here's where I'm just using something. If you've got a family in you change that family, and it changes all this. If you use curtain walls to do one of those,
Ridiculous.
then a curtain wall is
Well, yeah, I can, yeah, I can, but how long?
And
The time.
no matter what you do to it,
I
it
can
will
do
always
it,
be.
but
The only way to make it
even do the revision club.
appear the same around
I've been trying to get
is to
you
group it, and then you copy that text around it.
Yeah,
and that's
And the
just
reason why I
revision.
like to use curtain
you know, but
because
we're looking at
they are
getting
so easy to adjust. And you can put windows in your curve. So let's say I want to.
and we don't want to let them down.
Yeah,
He's doing it.
And I stick that
He's here
in
somewhere.
one of the panels of the curtain. And that becomes.
Yeah, he was unkind.
And I can adjust the height, up and down, sideways, whatever.
Working, but
Any way I
he's
like,
architect.
without having to edit a panel.
Yeah, stuff.
Because the
Text,
panel
like text, revision clouds.
Revision club.
He's the most open-page junior
will
ever.
adjust to whatever.
I have to go back to the just then like the call after and put the revision club.
I try and do it as I'm going. If I finish the sheet, I put them on, just so it's a little bit easier at the end. But still, it took me all of yesterday.
And then we have to do what? Do that as well. What the description
Yeah.
of what.
Oh, they had all the
To be
windows.
honest, I changed so many stuff and I really don't know what I have changed. So just in case I put a revision clause somewhere, just in case, just double check, I think.
Yeah, I think it's all between
That's right.
Well, I think, you know, we are trying to finalize the design and we are shooting for conversion to see that, so that doesn't help.
And then we need to change it.
You got to,
Actually, it was good to, we haven't touched on external walls and all
every
that
second
since
Wednesday
school.
of the month.
We started off with 1,500 warnings,
Yeah.
ended up with 800.
The
After we got rid
downstairs
of
kitchen,
the
they
and stuff. Yeah, so it's brought them all down.
starts at 5, goes to 7.
So bad.
And if you look it up on the website,
He actually did
Wara,
easy get it all. And actually, I like it. I like it.
I think I still I can get his matters, those matters. I miss his matters.
Is he allowed to bring his mother?
WA,
Yeah, well, you know, there's
West Australia Revit
there
uses it.
was Viviana.
You should come along, there's some good sessions.
I used to sit right next to her, so I was really, you know, when you don't talk to her, but I always have a matter ready.
I must have been his mother. He kept forcing it on me. That,
You should,
alright.
I'll ask Michael.
I've never seen anybody put sugar in it.
He's given a session on using
That's better
that.
though.
Well, it's easier for people that really don't have it, but you know, the ones, it's like tea. People that really have tea, they don't put sugar. At least you bring like me and Miguel, we like
No, I already know. The top bloke,
From one architect, one way to another one, another way to tinkering with have you come obviously is there any way you can minimize the if I suppose all the ways they draw or it affects us quite a lot with it. Well, we keep trying to
It depends on what you want. I worked with Arup on the only project I could say was a good collaboration.
Oh, it's just crazy.
Instruction.
Yeah.
And we sat down before and had a group talk about how we were going to collaborate and what they required from us, because they were obviously going to take our building and extract structural elements from it and start with those in their building. And then we were going to do copy monitor 22 of us. And it worked really well. So I would say as soon as you can get on board and talk to, it's not necessarily the architect you want to talk to, unless he's the you want to talk to the guy who's doing the knowledge and find out
Enough to make friends with the people that were working around me. So
some of the problems that before we get involved,
because they are
it's done being done because they have to propose it as
they have a lot of people
offer to the
from
client. You know,
yeah, but it's still got to go through
trying to avoid that they're going to
and let's just say, for instance,
so
certain
pretty much
boards have structural elements, they don't have them switched.
so they're going to do these last three work together. Really, they are like a team because they are all from
Columns they might have put in
so they become really
they
friends.
can easily switch
Because they work in the weekend. So they're going to do
and then
this.
when you import your model, take on their model, all those elements become.
Yeah, I was there when I was about.
And you have,
I know, right? Wait till you see how
for some reason, part of the project goes in the
get that project, it's really worthwhile. Yeah. But even just having the suite means that you've got architecture and structure and any embedded all within the one.
Yeah, we have it.
That's complete. So at the top there's structure and systems and architecture. So you can then do whatever you need to. So even if you don't get the model as you want it, you can go into the architectural side and change the elements to how you want it.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Makes sense. RSA. I think I mentioned the
Probably.
yeah. Yeah, I think it was last year. We're still developing our Revit skills now at the moment. Trying to, it's difficult when you have like an expert there to ask questions. I'm always trying to figure it out myself and trying to figure it out myself. It's quite frustrating sometimes.
Always ask.
Yeah, but when I first learned Revit, it was back when it wasn't really.
Oh, no, I think they're a little bit
And when they changed it,
slowly.
I'm a South American.
Yes.
Well, you're lucky you don't have
What's the difference?
because that
Well,
was the
we
first
don't
ribbon.
need that. No.
2010.
Yeah, I learned in 2009.
Yeah, but
Yeah, well, 2010
I went to that.
because what happened was different items that pop up when you've got, let's say you highlight something, and when the ribbon comes, changes depending on how you highlight something.
The nursery way.
When they did that, different items appeared in different places depending on what you highlight.
You know,
So nothing was consistent. But luckily in 2011, they fixed that.
when they run over $5.
2001, we never used 2010, we went through stuff in 2009,
I don't mind the software.
They learned very quickly, they got hammered before they
we're talking in codes, a different language. But
Walk around. looked at my face.
Writing a bad
Walking around,
It's gonna kill everyone.
this gun that I got from $2 at show that. It was like the worst gun ever. Like, you might as well got to put a timber on, this is my gun. I did one lap and finished my school and about half an hour.
The biggest thing with families is that they've got
It's like, you know,
if you're just writing,
you'd have to wait an hour or more to get
give it to somebody who's working on the just tell them to use
Really?
it. Because that's what I used to do with Michael. I used to be the one making the families. Give it to me before we put it out, publish it to everybody. And he'd say, here you go, break that. And if I couldn't break it, then we published it.
and there was a variety. You know, you see that for a big event like that, there'd be about, if you had a few drinks, you could probably get it and laugh.
But no,
You couldn't do it. Give it away.
yeah.
Yeah, I
Wouldn't be.
You get that
There's a lot of good forms. You can do that just simply with filters. Oh, right.
I hadn't seen that
I have some people that are funny and then try to say, oh my God.
You got everybody back? Yeah. Let's go.
She's practicing around.
Oh, it's no better.
Okay, we covered legends a lot. And phasing a lot. Okay, I'll just mention a couple of things. Filters. I'm just talking about filters. You may have problems with them. Filters are extremely useful. Use them as much as you can. Does everybody know how to create filters? Does anybody know how to create filters? No? Yes? One person? Okay. Two? Again? There's a couple of you. Okay, there's a few of you. Do you want me to go through creating a filter? Sure. Yes? Okay. Right, let's open a view. Somewhere here, view templates. You can create a view from a view template from the. Sorry, wrong thing. Filters I was talking about, wasn't I? Get it right, Shane. Filters. I'm looking at my other name. Right. There's been some filters applied to this one, obviously. When you want to create a new filter, you go here, edit new, and you'll have your list of what filters you've got, and what you want to apply them to and how you want them to be applied. So create a new filter. Let's call it test. And we're going to apply it to, I don't know, walls. And then over here, you can choose all the things that are available in your wall category to select it by or filter it by. So you could do file name, you can do its structural usage, you know, all this sort of stuff. You can choose however you want to grab it, depending on what you want to do with your filter, what you want to filter out. So let's just say by type name, and we're going to use, oops, sorry, where did that? You can either, if you use equals, it's got to be exactly as you say, or it won't pull it up. If you use contains, like a lot, let's say you want to turn tiles off on a floor, and you've got several different types of tiles. So if you just say tiles, then within the category, it'll look for tiles wherever they are and select them. And then you can turn off all floors that have tiles in them, which is really useful when you don't want to see the tiles. Because, you know, when you're doing your concrete setup drawing, even though you've set your tiles up as a floor, you don't want to see tiled floors. So you can quickly filter them out just by getting contains and then tiles. Now, I've got walls here, so I'm not going to do that. But, I don't know, brick. And I think this view doesn't have any brick on it anyway, but anyway, we'll go with that. Now you notice it's not there. Bugger. You've got to add it. I call it test, didn't I? Then you've got it either visible or invisible. So some things you may want to turn on, and you may want to change the way it looks. So you keep the tab, you keep it ticked, and you go in here and you change how you want that item to look. Or you can just turn it off completely, and then when you apply it, it'll turn that item off. So that would turn off all walls that have brick in the name. The one I just created. So that's how filters work. The useful thing about them is, let's say you want to create a fire strategy plan, and you wanted all your firewalls to turn up red. So you could go in there, say, you know that you've got firewall as part of your comments or whatever, a fire rating on your wall. You can then say, okay, if the rating equals or contains 120, 120, 120, it's going to be red. If it contains dash 120, 30, then it's going to be blue. And if it contains whatever, it can be a different colour. So you can set up different filters for each of those items, and then when you lay that out on your floor plan, you get your fire strategy straight away without having to do anything stupid. It's really simple and quick. You don't have to go drawing over it, drawing lines around your page saying this is a firewall. It just does it for you. So filters are really powerful. Use them. Right, that was filters. View templates, use them too. Everybody knows about view templates? Mm-hmm. Yep, good. Now that you've got 2014, they're even better. Because it applies them automatically across. So you don't have to keep updating. You know how yours used to have to update? Never would.
2013 used to do it linked.
Sorry?
2013 linked the view templates to the views. You wouldn't have to update that, would you?
Was it 2013? Yeah, oh yeah, it was. Sorry, 2013. Yes, you're right. It was 2013 that changed it. Yes. So
2012 was.
Yeah, 2012 was. Yep. So really good. Use view templates. They'll save you heaps of time and make your life worth living sometimes.
You can create filters in the view template.
Yes, you can. Yep.
So that's the other way that you can go about before we go back.
No, you would apply that to your template.
Yeah.
So that would sit within your view template. So you can create as many filters as you like, and you can apply them within your view template. Yeah. Okay, warnings. I want touch on warnings because people ignore them. This little box flashes up in the right-hand corner of this bottom right-hand corner of the screen, and everybody just blinks and hopes it goes away. Don't. There's a lot of useful information in those warnings, particularly when it says line is slightly off axis or wall is slightly off axis. That is one of the biggest pains in the butt you can come across. Because if it's a wall that you've just put in and it's slightly off axis, you then go put in a floor and you align your floor to that wall. It's now slightly off axis. You put in a ceiling. It's now slightly off axis. So you've now got 3 warning errors that are going to come up in your system when you look at your review your warnings that are going to cause you problems. Now Revit tracks every single warning and it slows your system down. So the more warnings you have, the slower your system's going to be. So minimise your warnings. Keep them as low as you can. So pay attention to what happens. Now some warnings are going to be acceptable. You'll live with them. When you're first creating your model, you may have walls overlapping height-wise, for instance. Let's say you're going level to level and you want one wall to come down slightly over the other and you're not going to worry about it straight away. But go around later and tidy it up. But you can do that by just going back and reviewing your warnings and seeing these things, because you know you can go and show. When you get a warning, manage, where is it? Under here. It's probably that. I should have done it this one.
Find out all your sins.
Find out all my sins, yes. It's down to 500 in this one, and somebody took this over after me, and you'll notice here it says line slightly off axis. That pisses me off. Yeah, so if you find, where are we? Wall is slightly off axis. There's a heap of them. So you can tick that and go show, and it will take you to where it is. So that's very useful for finding that thing in the model. Also, there's an ID that's listed with it. And you know you can find things by ID. Yeah, everybody knows that? Good. So you can then review it by ID, because sometimes the show doesn't take you to exactly where you think you're going to go. And you get a 3D view, and that's the best view you can have, but the thing happens to be inside the building and not outside the building. So you can't find it very well. But if you do the search by ID, it does do a better job of actually finding where it is for some reason. I don't know why. So use that little box that appears in the bottom right-hand corner and don't ignore it, because it will save you a lot of time later. Because if you get that warning where it says that the wall's slightly off axis, and then you go and align a floor and go and align a ceiling, they're by sketch generally, is the way most people create them. So you've actually got to go into the sketch to find the line that's off axis. It doesn't tell you which line's off axis. It just tells you a line is off axis. So then you've got to find it. And that can be painful if your sketch goes in a funny shaped building all over the place. Because you can highlight the whole thing and go, and it'll just give you the one warning for all the lines.
Do we know what the criteria is for a line off axis? Angle or?
It's less than a degree, I think.
Less than 1 degree.
Mm. So it really is a small amount. And for that small amount, there's no reason to ignore it. If you get the warning message straight away, like I said, when that warning message pops up, the first thing I do is I click on it and expand to see what's going to happen. So, what is this message? Okay, it's I've got duplicate type mark. Now, that's not a good thing. You don't want to have duplicate type marks. Duplicate marks are okay because they're just an individual thing. You might have 2 doors that have the same number, and it will tell you you've got a duplicate mark name. You can live with them. You can live with type marks the same as well, because sometimes you need to create 2 things that are different but have the same type mark. A window, for instance, might have the same type mark even though it's slightly different because of whatever reason there might be, but I have done it where I had to create two windows, same type mark, different windows. Okay, back to my thing now. Levels. That's it. Keep levels to a minimum. Don't create a level for your ceilings. When you create walls, they generally go level to level. So if you've created a level for your ceiling or an intermediate level for your planter boxes or something like that, every time you go to create a wall, it's going to go to the nearest level up. And you're going to have to go in there every time and edit it and say, no, I want you to go to this level up here. And that can be a real pain in the posterior. So keep your levels to a minimum. If you need a ceiling level, use a reference plane. And I suggest that when you are putting things on a ceiling, don't. Because if someone deletes the ceiling, you lose all your items. So if you've got lights, fans, ceiling hatches, whatever, that are face-based or level-based or whatever the case may be, don't attach them to your ceiling. Because when you delete the ceiling, all those items fall off your model. Put them on a reference plane so that they just sit there all the time. Where are we?
Ceilings as well should be off the ground area, because then when you go to tag it, it's like a certain amount above full level.
Yeah.
Let's say if you align the ceiling to a ceiling level and you tag it, then it's going to be 0.
Mm-hmm. Now, another thing with ceilings is you may have noticed you've created a room, you've put in a ceiling, and you want to move the wall. And the ceiling moves with it. Now, that can be a good thing. It can also be a bloody pain in the ass when you've got walls that are, or rooms that are not rectangular like this one, little bits and pieces cut out of them. And you move your wall and it says, can't make, what does it usually say? Can't create extrusion. And you go, what the hell does that mean? You look up your little thing and you expand it out and it says it's going to delete your ceiling. And the reason for that is it's moved the wall to such a point where one of the items, one of those lines of your wall, has deleted another line within the sketch. So the only way to do that is to then detach your ceiling from your wall. So you've got to go in there, edit your ceiling, move it off the wall so that it's not attached to it anymore. Then you go back into your model and you move the wall, and then you go back into your ceiling, and then you move the ceiling back to where it should be. Yes? That's the way everybody does it. Waste of time. Make a group out of your ceiling. So when you create your ceiling, before you do anything else to it, group it. So you can go through, create all your ceilings, you can create the whole ceiling as a group. But now that it's a group, it won't move when you move your walls. Yeah? Later on, you go back in and edit your ceiling. You just go into your ceiling plan and you notice that one piece of your ceiling stuck out over here and you can move it. But you're not jumping backwards and forwards between the two after you've moved your wall. So I highly recommend you make the ceilings a group.
Does that work even if you've made the ceiling sketch by picking off the all edges? It won't update once you group it?
Yep.
All right.
It's a good one. Tip for the day. Don't lock it to the walls. That's something else. When you are editing a floor, it'll always ask you, do you want to attach the walls? Always tick no. Same reason. You have the same problem with floors. They'll move backwards and forwards with the walls. So you don't want them to do it. Even though it may sound like it's really good, oh, I moved the wall and the floor goes with it and all that sort of thing. It can be more pain. When you get into a big complex building, it's more pain than it's worth. Trust me. Right.
Shane, sorry, one other question.
Yep, that's right.
If you've got sometimes in the early stages you don't know how thick your slab is.
Yep.
You make your walls, but you want them to go to the underside of the slab, and then
Yep.
the slab changes
Yeah.
depth, and then the walls intersect with your slab, and you just have a whole mess.
Yep.
How do you handle that?
Okay. I go level to level and I offset. So when I first put in a slab, I take a guess.
Yeah.
My slab's going to be 200 feet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I will offset the walls 200. It is very easy to go back later and select all those walls.
Yeah.
You can either just drag through horizontally through your building
Yeah.
and filter out everything except walls and change them to the heights you need to in
Yeah.
one go.
Yeah.
If you don't do that, you run into problems. Well, this is the next one, which was what I was going to talk about. How do you actually set up your walls? Because a lot of people will go, oh, I like to go level to level and offset, or I like to go disconnected to a certain height. Then you go and change your levels, or unconnected it is, isn't it? Unconnected. Then you go and change your levels, and the walls behave differently, obviously. I like to use level to level with offsets, mostly. Offset down, offset up, off the bottom. Even if I've got a half height wall, most of the time I would rather have it attached to the level below and offset from the same level by a number. That way it moves up and down exactly as I want it to. If you use unconnected, it doesn't always behave the way you think it's going to. It can create problems. I only use unconnected when I know I want the wall to be an exact height all the time. If I had, for instance, let's say I had a balcony and I had it set at level with the structural floor, level with the level, and I offset it off that level by 1,200 or 1,000, okay? And that has to be what it is. So I could say, okay, I know that's got to be 1,000 off there all the time. Yep. So I can use unconnected. Yeah. Now the balcony drops because it's got to come down 100 mils because of waterproofing or whatever, and then it's got to come up another 50 mils because we've added a heap of tiles and God knows what else. So at an unconnected, it will move however I want it to move and stay at 1,200. Or stay at 1,000. If I used my level to level and offset it by a certain amount off the floor, when I go, well, I now want that wall to be minus 100, it'll still stay at 1,200 where I originally set it, or 1,000 where I originally set it, so that the overall height is now 1,100. So it's changed. So you've either got to remember to say, well, now I've got to take into account that it's 100 mils lower and drop 100 off the top to get my overall unconnected height of whatever I want it to be. Or you can use unconnected in the first place. So balconies are a good place to have unconnected because you know you always want it to be whatever it is. I always make it more than what the law is anyway, because you always get stupid things with tiles and God knows what else build-ups, and the last thing you want is the builder coming to you and said, you said it was 1,000 off there and now it's only 950 and I've got to rip out all the balconies. So just a word of advice, put them up to at least 1,100. That way you never get caught out. Well, it's very unlikely unless they make a big cock up on site. So yeah, unconnected, know what it means if you're going to use it, and that's about the only time I do use it. When I know a wall has to be a certain height, and it doesn't matter whether I'm going to offset it down or up. I want it to stay that particular height. Dimensioning levels. The levels have a little number at the side, and most people, when they're changing the level height, go in there and change it. 10 metres, I want it to be 1050. Change it to 1050. Someone comes around and says, no, it's got to go to 1025. Change it back to 1025. If you've changed that half a dozen times and you go and dimension between the levels, you'll find that it's 1 millimetre out from what it says. You've got one that says 10 metres, one that says 12 metres, and your line in between says, instead of 2 metres, it says 1 metre 999. Why? That's because that stupid thing in the level is calculated in feet and inches and then translated back into millimetres. So every time you change that number, it does a calculation. And I know this works because I've done it. So don't do it. Don't change that number. When you're changing level heights, dimension them and say how high you want that level to be in the dimension. So you click on the dimension, activate your dimension, click on the level, sorry, activate your dimension and type in how high you want it to be, because that is in millimetres. And it doesn't matter how many times you change it up and down, it'll be correct. Because it looks really weird when you've got a floor-to-floor height of 3 metres, let's say, and your dimension says 2 metres 999.
Same problems that exist in AutoCAD. It comes down to the fact that it only does calculations to about 8 decimal places.
Well, Revit does calculations to 16 decimal places, but it's still because of this feet and inches translation.
Yeah.
And it's in the hardcore core of the Revit thing, so it's not about to change in a hurry. Oh gee, we're running out of time. What do we got? Groups. I told you about groups being able to exist in 2 phases. That's really useful. Assemblies. Anybody used assemblies? No? You're making an apartment building and you've got the same apartment type in several places in the building. Yeah? Easiest thing to do, create a group out of those walls, copy them around the building to make that way if you've got to adjust those internal walls, all you've got to do is edit that one group and adjust all of them. Really good. If your floor heights change between the levels, you've got to create a different group because otherwise the walls won't go to the height above. Yeah? Because it's in a group, it's locked. And as soon as you change it in one level, it'll change in the level below and you'll end up with walls coming through your ceiling and something stupid. So, and another big problem with groups in that instance is you want to make a global change of your door type. Yeah? Can't do it. You've got to go into the group, edit it there, and change the doors within that group. Yeah? And then you go to the next group and you change all the doors within that group. If it's in an assembly, you can change the doors within that assembly and then it'll do it all the assemblies that you created of that type. So that's a real benefit. So instead of using a group to make your apartments, make an assembly of walls and doors and whatever. And then you can copy those around.
Are you restricted by what you can add into assemblies?
Yes, you are. Curtain walls doesn't like in assemblies. That's a bugger.
That's shit.
You can put in the mullions and the panels though.
You can't put a system, but you can put a curtain panel.
That's right. Which doesn't help much really. But for internals, for walls and doors, assemblies are really useful. Mainly because of that reason that if you want to make a global change, you can do it, which you can't do with a group.
Would it include all like planning fixtures and all that sort of stuff?
You can make assemblies of all sorts of things. The Midland project that Hassel's doing, they made assemblies of all the fittings within the hospital rooms. And you can imagine how many they are. And that became their assembly, which they then transferred around. Now, every time you change an assembly, it changes that assembly and gives it a new name. Yeah, that's a pain in the butt. But it's very easy to select your old name and change them all to that new one created. Yeah? So it's a two-step process, but it's still better than a group where you've got to go through every single group and edit it. Well, every single group. Not every. You know what I mean. Is there any... I'm running out of time. So is there anything you want to just going down this list, anything you want to cover.
Rev clouds, what's your fastest way to do them?
Fastest way to do a Rev cloud.
Yeah.
Go to annotate, you click Rev cloud.
And do this thing all the way around the entire job.
Yeah, well, yes.
Is that it?
You don't have to, you can just do like 4 points and
Yeah.
you're not going to see it. If you're not seeing it, it doesn't matter what it looks like. If it's,
No,
yeah.
we have
Why
to see
wouldn't you
it.
see it?
If
You have to see it.
You have to see it.
Like, well, if you're clicking it just to purely rev up the drawing in, say, from a version A to version B, it doesn't.
Well, you don't have to do that either.
Is it?
All you got to do is select it on your sheet.
Yeah, I do realise that, but the point is that with the clouds you can understand what they, I suppose, you can keep track of by the revision clouds themselves. I found.
Well, we have to do individual views or individual parts of a building. Like if we change a window because we're doing Midland and we've got a lot of views, so
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And
No,
having
I'm
to
afraid
spend
it's
2
only
days
one way,
doing
and
this,
it's just
you know,
I can't think of any other way to do it.
that sucks.
Yes, and if you get caught out and you're drawing a Rev cloud on your sheet, which is a bad idea to do, by the way, don't do your Rev clouds around your views. Do them in the view itself.
What's that?
Right.
Because if that view is moved on the sheet,
True.
or is deleted from the sheet,
True.
you've got this cloud on your sheet. What the hell does that mean?
Yeah.
Yeah? Do them in your views. And if you don't, then decide, oh, I've done it in the view, I'll just copy it onto my sheet, or into my view. It's this big, and you think you need it to be that big, because obviously your sheet's at 1:1 and your view's at 1:50. Or whatever the case may be.
Well, I think Autodesk need to do something about it because, I mean, in AutoCAD you can just do one line like that and it's tiny, but when you go like that, Michael Rule said, you know, do one and then split it. That just takes us just as long to go all the way around.
Yeah, no.
So, you know,
I
what's
haven't
gonna-
found anything faster than just,
Ugh,
it's a pain in the butt, yes.
it is.
It would be nice if you could just draw the line. Okay, revisions, that's revisions. Keynotes, okay. Keynotes, get into Keynotes is all I can say. There's NatSpec have one available, there's various BIM people have them available. What that allows you to do is to select from a table for elements in your model of how you want the thing described. Now, you could create your own table. It's a text table, comment eliminated or something like that. And then it gives you, it's like a tag basically. You click on the wall, first time that wall's selected, it will ask you what the keynote is for that particular wall, if it's by element, and you can go to it'll call up your table, and then you go, okay, it's masonry, and it's this, and you know, this table then drops down into various stages and gives you an element that you can attach to the wall. It can either then give you a code, depending on the tag type that you use, or the full description of what the wall is. Yeah? So when you go around and annotating your views, instead of having to type in it's this or copying your notes across from one view to the next, you just click on it with your keynote tag and it gives you all the information straight away. So it saves you a heap of time.
Can I ask though, if say for example you're putting keynotes on elevations,
Yep.
do you keep it very generic and then let your detail go into more depth for it, or is it all
Yes.
refer back to specs?
You can you can link your keynotes to your specs.
So that in the large format scale you keep it generic and then your details.
Your details are much more specific, yeah. Yeah.
So keynote those details, or do you just write?
You could keynote some parts of it, and it depends on how you've done the detail. Because if you're detailing just in 2D, then obviously you won't be able to keynote anything because it's just line work. But if you're using the model for some of it, then you can keynote or tag parts of that.
So you usually doing like details in either or 2D, or you use?
I use both. It depends on what I'm doing. I quite often like to do a call out or a section of the element I'm detailing, and then turn everything off after I've drawn the lines that I need. And then later on, I can always do it, because sometimes you're in a hurry to get drawings out, and you need your detail. Yeah? And generally your details aren't going to change that much. But your wall might, but your detail, it might have even moved. So now your view's in the wrong place, your crop box is in the wrong place. Yeah? So you've got to be able to have something on paper that stays static, so that you can then come back to it later and and fix it if you know that it's if it has moved or if your details change. But at least you can send out a drawing with the basics of how it was straight away.
Just on that, so I've been caught where I've used part 2D as part 3D, and when it's moved, we use 3D elements there and half so that would you go specifically all 3D or all 2D?
No, I still don't mind both. It depends on how you're doing it. But like I said, if you go that way and that happens to you, you've got to realise that when I send this drawing out, it's a mess. So if you don't have the time to fix them when it happens, then I would go all 2D or all 3D. Yeah, but when you go all 3D, you've got to remember also that your text is going to not be lined up with your model. So some people now are going all 2D, but there's no link back to the model. At least if you've drawn over the top of your model, you haven't just started in a detailed view, you've got your model underneath, you can click on your model, turn your model on, and see what's happened. And it still gives you your plane of reference, what's going on in that particular view.
Going to have to wrap it up.
Yep.
4 o'clock. Thanks, Shane.
That's all right.
If anyone has got more questions, he's around.
Yeah.
Fire up.